Hey everyone, so we're in my fish room here, and in this video I'm going to give you a tour of everything that I have going on in this fish room. Off to my left here I have a ton of little projects and little setups that haven't quite yet reached my channel, and that's partly because some of these experiments and projects I'm not quite ready to have a dedicated video, but I think it'd be really fun to go around and show you all of the little projects that I've been working on, and especially because in the last few weeks I've been making a lot of headway on developing out this fish room, and I know that in the next couple weeks things are going to change quite drastically. I have a lot of aquariums that I'm really looking forward to setting up, as well as some new projects and experiments with immersed plants, live cultures of different types of foods, and breeding projects with all kinds of different species of fish that I'm going to be working on in the near future. And as you can see, I even already have a new Ebb and Flow Emersed setup off to my right here that I'll give you guys a closer look, and I'm really excited because with this setup, combined with this setup behind me, it's going to actually double the amount of immersed plants that I can be growing, and it all fits really nicely in the closet here because as you'll see, this fish room is actually quite small, so I'm packing quite a bit of stuff and projects in this tiny little room, but it's my little oasis here, so I'm really excited to show you guys and share all of the things that I have going on in this room. So let's get into the tour. So this is the fish room. Like I mentioned, it's pretty small. It's 8 feet wide and 12 feet long, and the foundation here is really the shelving units that I'm using. These are 4 foot by 2 foot wide shelving units, and they're actually elevated off the ground by a wooden structure that I built. And the reason for that is just because I wanted to have some aquariums at eye level, and then I also wanted some mini ponds on the floor of my fish room. And I think having the shelving units elevated the way they are is really maximizing the amount of aquariums that I'm able to put into this space. I'm really excited to expand some of these mini ponds. So in total, I'll have space for 8 mini ponds. The only reason why I have 4 set up right now is because I only just recently completed the air loop system that goes around the perimeter of the room here. And now that the air loop system is complete and it's working really well, I pretty much have unlimited amount of air that I can supply to any kind of aquarium or pond that I fit in this room. And I was actually really lucky to get a great deal on a bunch of little box filters from someone on Marketplace. And so I'm going to be using these box filters to filter pretty much any aquarium or pond that I set up in this room. So I was pretty lucky to snag that deal at around the same time that I finished my air loop system. Alright, so let's take a closer look over on this section of the fish room where I have all of my live food cultures. I have quite a few species on the go, and I've been really loving culturing all these different kinds of critters. And I even have some species that I don't see other people culturing in their fish rooms that I think are super underrated. So let's take a closer look and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. Alright, so as you can see here in this terrarium, I have quite a few different live cultures ongoing. So let's go through some of the species that I've been culturing. The first one is Moina, which is a type of crustacean. They're free swimming, very similar to Daphnia, except they're a little bit smaller. And I think they're also more prolific because I've been able to harvest them in much higher quantities than I have with Daphnia. I do also culture Daphnia as well, so I have those separated, of course, so that I don't get them mixed up. And then in a lot of these larger containers, I have a combination of Blackworms, which are obviously down in the sediment, and then I also have some more Moina growing in the water column of those containers. And I think by combining these species together, it actually is a really good system because any of the free-floating particulates or algae that I add into the bin, if it settles into the sediment, then the blackworms end up consuming that. So it actually works really well, and I've been able to harvest quite high quantities of both species. Now, the reason why I have them in a terrarium is actually a little bit of a new development, and that is because I've noticed I had some unidentified worms growing in some of my cultures. And I actually have a little microscope here that I was able to identify those worms, and they're definitely a type of chironomid, or also known as bloodworms in the aquarium hobby. And I'm pretty familiar with the bloodworm life cycle, and I know that they'll eventually emerge as adult flies. And so I wanted to set up a little bit of a terrarium that I could kind of contain those adult flies in one area so that hopefully they could reproduce and lay more eggs into these culture containers. And I've only had this set up for a few days now, but in the last few nights when the emergence usually happens, I've had probably 50 to 100 flies emerge out of these containers. And I've actually taken some samples and looked at them under my microscope, and I did see quite a few eggs and newly hatched bloodworms from those eggs. So I know that they are reproducing successfully, so I'm really excited to see in the next few weeks if their populations really start to increase. because I think this is one of those live foods that is probably a little underrated, that I don't see a lot of people culturing in their fish rooms, probably because it's a little bit more elaborate and you have to have a special container to house the adult flies. But I do think that this is probably a good food source if you're trying to get some fish to spawn. And if you have some baby fish, the newly hatched bloodworms are incredibly small, so they're probably a really good food source as well. And so of course I'm going to be playing around with these in the next few months, and I'll have some more videos on my channel documenting exactly how I culture those bloodworms. And just at the bottom there, you can see quite a few different buckets. I'm culturing tons of green water as well as additional cultures of Moina and Daphnia, just so that I have multiple containers in case anything crashes. But I haven't experienced any crashes just yet. And then in one of those buckets, I'm also culturing Cyclops, which is a type of copepod. And I think that's also one of those underrated live foods that I don't think many people think about when they think of the classic live foods that they could feed their fish. So I've been playing around and experimenting with the best way to get those populations really high. So I'm sure I'll have a video on that in the future as well. Out of all the mini ponds that I have set up in my fish room, these two are the only ones that currently have fish in them. This one here in the far corner just has a mixed bag of Endlers. And the cool thing about this bin is there was a little bit of an explosion of hair algae, but I kind of let it go because I think it makes a really great cover for the Endlers. And I've been feeding a ton of live foods. Specifically, the Endlers have a little bit smaller mouths, so I've been feeding them Moina, which they have been consuming like crazy. And the cool thing is that when I add the Moina, they really hide well in the hair algae, and so the Endlers don't consume them all immediately. And so that kind of allows them to hunt for live foods throughout the day. And I think it kind of helps bring out some of that nice natural instincts out of the fish. And they've been doing really well in this system. And so this bin on the right here has a small school of dwarf neon rainbowfish, as well as a school of the longfin Whitecloud mountain minnows. And these are actually the same longfin Whiteclouds that I've had on my channel about 6 years now. So they've been with me for quite a while, and they're pretty special to me. And so in the future, I'm hoping to set up a dedicated mini pond for those longfins, because when you get the genetics right, the longfins are really spectacular. And I think that would be a really cool breeding project to try to improve on that strain and get some really nice longfins in that fish. And I actually have a spawning mop here, and either the Whiteclouds or the dwarf neon rainbowfish has been laying eggs in the spawning mop that I've harvested and have in a small container, and I'm raising up a small batch of fry right now. So I have a feeling that these baby fish are the dwarf neon rainbowfish because they've been growing incredibly slow for me. And as we know, rainbow fish grow pretty slowly. I have bred the longfin Whiteclouds, and I find the fry grows a little bit quicker. So that's not what I'm currently experiencing. So I do think that they are the dwarf neon rainbow fish. But hopefully as we raise those fish up, we'll be able to see exactly what fish they are. But it's really encouraging to see some breeding activity happening in these bins. And I'm only hoping to expand on my breeding projects here in the near future. And in this bin here, I don't actually have any fish, but I forgot to mention this when I was talking about the live food cultures that I've been culturing in my fish room. And this is actually a culture of scuds, which again is a really great live food source that you could be feeding your fish as well. All right, so moving on to this side of the fish room, as you can see here, I have a shelving unit with quite a few Emersed bins. Many of these you'll probably recognize from some of my other videos, but we'll go through and give you kind of a quick tour of all the different species that we have growing. So in these bins here, you'll recognize these from my most recent video where we were kind of looking at different soils to see how well they grow Emersed plants. And actually, a little update on that, the bin that had the poor performing soil and a lot of the plants looked really unhealthy, we ended up adding some hydroponic nutrient solution into that bin. And some of the new growth that has come off of those plants looks really healthy. So I'm pretty optimistic that those plants are going to rebound, and hopefully we'll have some really healthy growth coming off those plants in the next few weeks. In addition, the plants that were looking pretty healthy from that video, they're still doing really well and growing in that bin. So those are just Anubias nana plants. And moving on here, we have some wendtii, and they're growing in this bin here. It's a little bit of an overcrowded bin, as you can see. But the plants are really healthy and they're growing really well. We have tons of baby crypt plants that are spreading through the soil. So if we wanted to, we could grab some of these and plant them in a different setup, just like my ebb and flow system. In fact, from that experiment where we grew these crypt plants in my Ebb and Flow system, we did have a number of plants that ended up developing some flowers, and they were probably some of the healthiest crypt plants that I've ever seen. And so ever since we set up these plants in that experiment and we had some of them develop flowers, it's been a bit of a dream of mine to do that again and try to cross-pollinate some of the flowers and propagate these crypt plants through flowers. I've definitely never seen that done before, and I have no idea if it's possible, but it definitely would be a rewarding project that maybe we could do in the future, especially now that we have a new Ebb and Flow Emersed setup that I installed just behind the camera there that I'll show you in a few minutes. And so moving on here, I've got a few different random bins with plants growing. So honestly, a lot of these kind of get neglected and just kind of sit and grow on their own. But as you can see, the plants are super healthy. So in this bin, I've got a smaller species of crypt. This is actually Cryptocoryne petchii. And then I also have some stem plant here. So this is pearlweed, which is growing really well in these Emersed systems as well. So this is crypt petchii. And then I also have another bin here, which truthfully, I haven't opened this in probably months. But again, some more crypt petchii. I've harvested some of it and then just kind of let the rest grow in here. And so that's kind of the beautiful thing about Emersed plants is that once you set up these tubs, you can really keep the plants indefinitely, which is helpful when you're setting up a lot of aquariums and you might not have space for the plants right now, but you don't want to throw them out. So it's a really great kind of time capsule where you can kind of freeze your plants and maybe even grow them quite a bit as well, but definitely prevent them from dying out on you. And then in the future, once I have more aquariums and I need some plants, I can simply just grab them from here and plant them directly into the aquarium. And the only downside to doing this is that the plants might die back a little bit once you plant them in your aquarium. But a little bit of dieback is normal, even if you buy plants from a pet store that is grown submersed. Because after all, the plants need to adapt into your aquarium anyways. But in my experience, if you have a healthy enough immersed grown plant and you plant it into your aquarium, it's usually going to rebound, especially if the root system is really strong and robust. You really shouldn't have any issues, and with enough time, that plant is going to adjust properly to your aquarium. So this next bin here has a ton of Hydrocotyle tripartita. And it's kind of funny because at one point I had these all individually potted in separate net pots, and everything was super neat and organized. And as you can see, because this is a carpeting plant, it eventually just completely exploded and grew all over the bin. And obviously I wasn't keeping up with the maintenance here, and it honestly just grows incredibly quick. So this is a really great plant, especially in aquariums. It'll form these beautiful carpets, and the leaves almost look like clovers, which I think is super unique and something you don't see very often in the aquarium trade. And I do also have a few random plants of Cryptocoryne wendtii in here. And the unique thing with this bin is it doesn't actually use soil. I'm using montmorillonite clay, which is the same substrate that I use in my other Ebb and Flow system. And then I use hydroponic nutrient solution to supply all of the nutrients for these plants. It's a different way of growing Emersed plants, but as you can see, it does work as well. The only downside is that sometimes the water can get a little bit stagnant, so you don't have as much oxygen going to the roots of your plants, which I think is the main benefit of having that Ebb and Flow Emersed system. But nevertheless, this is obviously a cheaper and more readily available option for people if they want to grow Emersed plants. So if you're interested in growing Emersed plants, you can really pick any of these systems and start growing plants in your house. And last but not least here, we've got some more Cryptocoryne petchii. But again, these are actually potted in that montmorillonite clay that I was talking about. And again, just using hydroponic nutrient solution to feed these plants. As you can see, these plants are super healthy as well. And probably some of these plants are going to eventually move their way into my new Ebb and Flow system, which is what I'm going to show you guys next. So like I mentioned, I have a new Ebb and Flow Emersed plant setup here in my fish room. This one is housed in my closet. I have a custom shelving unit that I built, and then I have some bins set up, and I just finished plumbing everything, and it's working really well. It is pretty much an exact copy of this shelf that you see here that you might be more familiar with on my channel. This is also an Ebb and Flow system, and it allows me to grow around 500 plants, and it's super easy to maintain, and it's definitely my preferred way of growing Emersed plants. We've done tons of experiments with it, and right now I'm growing tons of Anubias, but in the near future I'm going to start to move some plants into this system. I'm hoping to get some new species, and I'm also hoping to do a lot more experiments. As you can see, we've got a lot of smaller bins as opposed to fewer larger bins, and that's just simply because I didn't have a ton of space in my closet to put larger bins. So this is what I could fit in the closet to maximize the space that I have available. And so the plan is to use these, which are 2-inch net pots, to grow the plants in this new system. This is the same net pots that I'm using in my older system here, and it works really well. And in fact, I actually played around with some of the extra pots that are going to go into this bin just to see how many plants I could house in these smaller bins. And because I have 8 of them, combining the capacity with this new system with my older system, I'll have a little bit over 1,000 plants that I could grow between these two systems alone. And the really cool thing is that I'm only one person here in my fish room, but because things are really well automated, I have all the lights on timers and the circulation pumps are also on timers. All I really have to do is replenish the hydroponic nutrient solution every couple weeks, and all the plants just automatically grow on this system and require very little attention from me. So I think it's really cool to be one person and be able to grow well over 1,000 plants in your fish room. And speaking of the older system here, not a lot has really changed since the last update that I provided. So if you're curious exactly what plants I have growing in this system, you can watch this video that I give a more in-depth tour on this system. But also down below, let me know if there's any specific experiments that you want to see me run in my new setup here. I'd like to hear from you. We have a ton more space to run these cool experiments. So please, if you have any cool ideas, let me know down below. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, take care.